Welcome back to TrainSignal's Citrix XenApp training. You're watching Configuring Web Interface lesson. Of all the Citrix technologies that are out there, my favorite has got to be Web Interface. I've been in love with Web Interface since it was called Enfuse. Yep, that's another product that went through the marketing rename process that Citrix likes to do. But I've been in love with this product since it was Enfuse, and Project Columbia is just, I don't know why, it's one of my favorite Citrix products. So this is definitely going to be the favorite lesson of all this course. So what we're going to talk about is Web Interface communication process, how the flow of communications happens between the end user through Web Interface to the Citrix farm and back, and how it connects. So I'm going to take you through that. We're going to talk about the different Web Interface site types that you can create. Then we're going to move into the demo portion of this and talk about how you create Web Interface sites and go through all that and see how you can customize your Web Interface, change the colors, brand it, put your logo on there, so on and so forth. Alright, so the Web Interface communications process. So Web Interface is a web portal that users can visit, authenticate with Active Directory credentials, and get access to a list of applications they have access to and connect. Now, how does this process flow? So it starts at the client device. The client device, the user that's operating this, is going to open a browser and point to the web interface. That's step number one. Once he points to the web interface, it's going to prompt them to log in. The user is going to have to provide credentials, Active Directory credentials. Once the Active Directory credentials are entered on web interface is going to pass these credentials to one of the servers, one of the XenApp servers in the farm that's running the XML service. That particular server is going to pass the credentials to Active Directory and authenticate the user. Once it authenticates the user, it's going to query the IMA service within the farm and get a list of the published resources that this particular user has access to. It's going to send that information back to Web Interface. Web Interface is going to display that information to the user. This is step number 5 at this point. The user is going to make a selection of which application they want to launch. So let's say they launch Calculator or Notepad or one of the applications. At that point, that request comes to the Web Interface server. We're at step number 6. The Web Interface server is going to pass it again to the XML service. The XML service at this point is going to determine which server in the XenApp farm is the least busy server. It's going to pass this request to that server, provided that that server has that application as one of the applications that it services. If it does, the XML service will pass it to that particular server. Then there's the STA service on that server that's going to service the request. It's called the Secure Ticket Authority service. That Secure Ticket Authority service is going to generate a secure ticket for this published application. So the information is going to be compiled and sent back to the Web Interface. So at this point, the Web Interface has the information that the user needs to connect to the server. It also has a secure ticket generated by the Secure Ticket Authority. It's going to compile this information, send it back to the user, and allow the user to make a direct connection between the device that they're on and the XenApp server that created the secure ticket and that has that application that the user is requesting, and an ICA connection is established directly, and at that point Web Interface is completely out of the picture. So keep in mind, Web Interface brokers these connections, allows the user an easy way of accessing resources and figuring out which is the least server, but once a connection is established, the connection is direct from the user device to that particular XenApp server. Now what I've done in this slide is I've outlined these steps from 1 to 8 again, and these numbers are not just bullet point numbers. They correlate to the numbers on the previous graph that take you through the process of what's happening at each individual step of the process. So just in case I was too fast, or if you wanted a way to visualize it, or maybe pause the video and make notes of these steps, this is exactly what's happening from 1 to 8. Alright, now there are 2 types of Web Interface sites that we can create, as you'll see later on in the demonstration. There's a XenApp website, and there's a XenApp services site. Now the XenApp services site we've already created in an earlier lesson that allows the XenApp plugin that's installed on an endpoint device to interface with a web interface server and enumerate applications from that web interface server. So the XenApp plugin requires a connection to that web interface server, and in this case, you would have to create a XenApp services site. A XenApp website, however, is what you create in order to allow the users to connect to a particular web page, authenticate against that web page, and see a list of applications that they have access to. So two different sites that serve two different purposes. Now, the XenApp website can also be proxied behind an access gateway, behind a secure gateway, but we'll talk about that when we talk about securing XenApp in a later lesson. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the demo and start configuring web interface. The management of the web interface happens through the Web Interface Management Console, which is located in all programs, Citrix, Management Consoles, and Citrix Web Interface Management. Now, as you can see, we already have a PN agent or a XenApp services site that we created in an earlier lesson. So what we want to do here is create a XenApp website. So I'm going to select that, right-click it, and click on Create Site. Again, we have IIS installed, so I want to integrate this as part of the default website. This will be the path to that particular website. All of these are configurable options that you can change. The name of this particular site. And I also want to set it as the default page of the IIS site. So when users just put in the IP address or the fully qualified domain name of this server, it will automatically return the web interface site. So I want to make sure I check that. If you didn't want it, you would uncheck it, obviously. Click on Next. Here it's asking you, look, there are many different authentication or integration points that you can configure with web interface. By default, web interface is selected, which means users are going to authenticate at the web interface site. They come up, put in username, password, they authenticate. You have other options. Users can authenticate to a web server. Users can authenticate to third party using Kerberos through Access Gateway. You might want the authentication to happen at Access Gateway, and as soon as they pass the credentials from Access Gateway, there's no logon to web interface. The web interface will automatically just show access to the relevant resources, so that's another configurable option. Microsoft Active Directory Federated Services is another option that you can choose. For the purposes of our demonstration, we're going to go with web interface. We're going to click on Next, and we are going to finish. This is all you need to do in order to create the XenApp website. Now what's happening now is it's creating all the HTML, all the files in the background. Once it's done, again, it's going to allow us to configure the site. If you didn't want to configure it at this time, you can uncheck the box. Which farm are you trying to configure? It's very possible that you can have more than one farm that you're trying to configure. You can have a XenApp farm, a XenApp 5, 6 farm, for example. You can have a Xen desktop farm that you're trying to integrate. And what you're specifying here is, look, I need to be able to send the requests that I'm getting from the endpoint user. Remember how I told you the endpoint is going to send a request to the web interface. Web interface is going to find one of the XML services which run on XenApp in the farm and pass that request to. This is where you would specify that particular server. So in my case, I'm doing XA01, and if I had more than one server, so for example, if we have XA02 in the farm, what happens then if XA01 is unavailable? It'll go to XA02. It also allows you to load balance between these two, so that in the event that one is not functioning for whatever reason, the request goes to the second one. Now in my environment, the XML service is configured on port 80. Pay attention to this. If you've modified this, then this is where you would change it. For the purposes of this demonstration, we're not securing this. We're going over HTTP. This is all local. The web interface, the way we're deploying it right now, is local to our environment, so there's no DMZ or external access. But if you wanted to change that, there are several options here like HTTPS and SSL relay that you can choose from. Just make sure you have the proper infrastructure configured to accept it. Once you're ready, click on Next. At this point, it's asking, well, how would you like to authenticate the users? How are the users going to authenticate? They can authenticate by explicitly putting in their username, their password, and their domain, so they have to enter it. Or you can select pass-through. What pass-through basically means is that web interface is going to grab the credentials that the user logged on with to the actual computer. So if the user logged on to Windows 7 with the username kevin.flynn and the password, then it's going to grab that secure token from Windows that you've logged in with and pass those credentials through the web interface. So when you visit the web interface site, there's no logon process. You automatically are presented with your published resources, whether it's desktops, applications, or content. So you can check that. You can also check pass-through with smart cards if you needed to. This is all for basically smart card access. And then if you wanted to give access to anonymous users, you could do that. So we're going to stick with explicit for now. Click on next. In this case, you're allowing the user to specify any domain. So the user is going to be presented with a box for username, a box for password, and a box for domain. If you don't configure anything, then and you have multiple domains in the environment, the user can authenticate against any one of those domains. However, if you wanted to lock it down, as we're going to do now, you can restrict it to just, for example, encom. So the user will only be able to authenticate against encom. Now, in some other steps, when we start talking a little later on how to configure things, I'll show you how you can even hide the domain box so that the user has no choice but to authenticate against the right domain. Well, how do you want your web interface to look? The minimal configuration here looks sort of like this, doesn't have a lot of graphics, etc., etc. And then the full, you'll notice that it adds a little more graphics and makes it a little prettier and so on and so forth. So we're going to stick with full for now. Click on next. What type of site is this? Is this going to service only online resources, only online applications, published applications, content, published desktops, etc., etc.? Or is it going to be just offline, just streamed applications? Or maybe you want it to be both. Again, you can have multiple sites, and depending on the use case, you might want it only online or only offline. For the purposes of our demonstration, we're going to go with dual mode. We're going to click on next, and we're going to click on finish. That's all there is to it from a configuration standpoint. Now, before I move any further, let's go ahead and open a browser, go to the web interface site, and see what we have. Now, typically, you would put in the address of the XenApp server. So, for example, in my case, it would be XA01. And voila. You now need to put in the username and password. So let's go ahead and put in administrator. We've already specified that our domain is encom. So the domain doesn't exist. And I'll show you where you can make it visible or keep it hidden. We're going to click on login at this point. And there you go. You automatically are seeing the applications that you have access to. We have access to the streamed application FileZilla. We have access to WinRAR. We have access to our published desktop, and we have access to content. Now, do you guys remember that folder that we created? This is where the XenApp plugin is grabbing that folder information, because when we configured it in the delivery services console, we didn't configure it for WinRAR. We certainly didn't configure it for FileZilla, but we did configure it for the community desktop, and we configured it for content. So content is cnn.com. So this is why the XenApp plugin, you saw it down here, it showed the folder. So now if you're up here, you go back to applications, you click on WinRAR. Voila, it launches WinRAR. Now let's go ahead and click on File, and let's go ahead and exit out of here. If there are any error messages during the login, or if you even want to customize this, you can customize it to the point where you can show users a particular message that you want to deliver, maybe a tip of the day or something. You can allow users to change different settings here. You can allow them to change some of the display settings, some of the session settings, account settings, connection settings. So if you go into display, they can change some of the mode if it's English language, full graphics, high graphics, etc., etc. And I'll show you where you can control where the users, you can control what they have access to and what they don't have access to. So all of this stuff is locked down at this point, and typically the user wouldn't be able to see it, or you can basically customize it so that you allow them to see what you want and disable what you don't want them to see. Now, we connected to web interface from a computer that already has the XenApp plugin installed, so we were able to launch applications very easily. Now, what happens if you're connecting from a computer that doesn't have the XenApp plugin installed? What happens if you're connecting from outside of the LAN? What happens if you're at a friend's house and you need to access Citrix and they don't have the XenApp plugin? Well, you're not going to call the help desk and say, hey, can you use SCCM or Alterius or some mechanism to deploy this? It just doesn't work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to a different computer and see what happens when you're trying to access the web interface from a computer that doesn't have the XenApp plugin installed. Alright, so if we launch Internet Explorer on here and we go to XA01 and we log in with administrator and our password, Web Interface has the smarts. It has the capabilities of detecting that you're connecting from a machine that doesn't have the XenApp plugin. Now, this machine can be a Windows machine, could be a Mac, could be a Linux. Web Interface is going to detect the appropriate version for the operating system from which you're connecting from, and it's going to allow you to install the proper plugin. Now, this is assuming that you have all the plugins loaded on Web Interface. So for example, if you only have the Windows plugins loaded on Web Interface, then if you come in from a Windows operating system, as what we will do, it's going to detect that you don't have it, it's going to prompt you. If you're coming in from a Mac client and you don't have the Mac client loaded on Web Interface, what's going to happen here is you're going to click on the download icon and it's going to redirect you to the Citrix website and show you how to download the Mac client. Same thing for Linux. So if you want Web Interface to give you the right client, you want to make sure you're loading those clients on Web Interface. So if I accept here and click on download, it's going to prompt me with the appropriate client for my operating system. I'm going to click on run to run it here. And you'll see here that you have a green check mark and says an appropriate client is available on your computer. So it detected that there is a correct client that's available on your computer, and now you can launch applications. But how do you control the behavior of this particular detection process through Web Interface? To do that, we're going to switch back to our Web Interface server here. Inside of the Web Interface Management Console, what we're going to do is we're going to right-click on the XenApp site that we just created, and we're going to drag down to where it says Client Deployment. So this is where you can control how it detects it. So right now, if you click on Client Detection, you'll see that Perform Client Detection at Logon. So that's enabled. If you didn't want it to perform the client detection, obviously you can disable that. Now you can offer upgrades. This is pretty cool because let's say you want to have some automated manner by which you upgrade all of your users' existing clients. So the next time a user connects, if you've put the right packages, the newer bits on the Web Interface server, then the client detection process is going to note that, hey, you're using an older version of the XenApp plugin. It's going to offer you an upgrade path so that you can upgrade to the latest version. And now here it's saying, what do you want to do, or how do you want to configure what happens in the event that a detection process is complete? What do you want to do? You can, whenever a client is needed, I want you to display a message. Only if resources cannot be accessed, never. So you can customize the types of messages that the user will see when the client detection process is complete. Now, under the online section down here, you have also what's known as the failback behavior. The failback behavior basically fails back. If you can't install a XenApp plugin, if you're in a kiosk at the library, in the airport, you come up to a computer that you don't have administrative rights, you cannot install application for whatever reason, you can have the Web Interface have some kind of a failback mechanism where it fails back to using the Java plugin. The Java is a very lightweight XenApp plugin that gives you a very good user experience and doesn't necessarily need to be installed anywhere. So it's sort of like agentless, with the exception and the requirement that Java would obviously have to be installed on the destination computer in order for this to function. But what's happening here is you're saying basically deploy a native client, and allow users to choose between that and client for Java. So this would probably be what you want to choose, just in case they can't deploy the client, they can connect to Java. Otherwise, you can just do automatically fail back to the client for Java. So that could be another option that you might want to select. Now, if you've configured this, then you want to configure the options for client for Java. Now, obviously, this is a lightweight package that you're trying to use. It's a lightweight agent, And if you don't want to give some of these features, the package becomes lighter. So if you want to give access to audio, then obviously you're increasing the size of the package, you're increasing how much you're pushing over the wire. So what you want to do here is make sure you're configuring the functions or the features of the Java client appropriately so that it serves its purpose and not more than what it needs to serve. So if this is for kiosk, for example, and you might not necessarily want to give them printer mappings, or you might not want to give them clipboard mappings, etc., etc., you can disable or enable these features accordingly. Offline. What do you want to do with the Citrix offline plugin? This allows you to control the offline plugin behavior as well. Now, as you know, and as we've been talking about, users that need to be able to access offline applications or streamed applications need to install the streamed application or the offline plugin. So in order to do that, you can automatically detect the session URL. So automatically point them to a URL where they can download that plugin, or you can specify one. Now be careful how you use the automatic one, because if they're coming from the outside, then it probably won't automatically detect and point them to that one. So you probably want to just take a little caution on how you can configure, or how you configure that in particular. We're going to click on cancel here. Let's go ahead and right click on this site and see what other options we can do to configure it further. So if I right click on it, the first thing you'll notice is server farm. So we've already configured the farm. There's nothing special here. When we went through the creation of the wizard, we actually saw this screen. This is where you would configure this farm name, the servers that are participating in the XML service, etc., etc. And you have some advanced settings. You always want to have enable socket pooling that you want to enable. For the most part, these settings should never be changed unless you're troubleshooting or there's some particular issue that you're trying to address from a socket timeout and an XML service perspective. We're going to click on cancel here. From an authentication methods perspective, again, we have explicit configured. Now, if you wanted to allow pass-through as well, you're able to configure both settings by just basically going to the properties. Here you'll see domain restrictions, so we're restricting access to this particular domain at this point. You have automatic login if you wanted to allow users to do an automatic login, allow users to customize the automatic login process. From an explicit perspective, authentication, here what you're saying is I want to be able to do domain user and UPN. You could do some stuff for Unix and Novell services as well. If you click on the settings here, we pre-populated the domain value and we have it set to hide domain box. Now if you wanted to, it could pre-populate it, but you could have the domain box displayed so that users know which domain they're connecting to. This could be useful or not depending on the environment. If you're in an environment where there's only one domain and users don't know or don't care about the domain, then there's really no point in displaying the domain box. However, in environments where you have multiple domains and users are aware that there are multiple domains and they might have, for example, different usernames and passwords for different domains, then it might be helpful to display the domain box but lock it so that they can't change it. So you're forcing them to log on to NCOM. You're showing them which domain they're logging on to just for informational purposes and so that they can provide the proper username and password, proper credentials, basically. If you wanted to configure two-factor authentication, this is where you would be able to do it. You can do RSA, safe word, radius, etc. Password settings, you can give users the ability to change their password from web interface. This could be a handy tool where users can go to web interface and choose to change their password, or only when the password expires, they can visit the web interface server and change the password. Account self-service. You can allow account unlocks, so again, depending on how much flexibility, what you're trying to accomplish, and the sensitivity of the particular site, you might want to or not want to provide these types of services. From a pass-through perspective, again, you have Kerberos authentication here, so if you wanted to enable Kerberos, you can do that for pass-through authentication to the servers as well. So we're going to click on cancel to keep these at their defaults for now. If I right-click on here again, and come down here to website appearance, this is where you have the ability to customize how your web interface site is going to look like. So let's go ahead and start off with layout. So if I click on layout, the overall layout, what do you want to do from a screen layout perspective? You can choose automatic here. You can choose full graphics, lower graphics, automatic. Basically, it will choose for you based on the system and the connection and all sorts of different algorithms. Allow users to customize this, so you can allow the users to say I want to see full or I want to see low graphics, basically. So you're allowing them to customize what they see in this case by checking this box. Display settings, these are the same settings that we were looking at when we were at the web interface site. So if I go back to my web interface site here, and let's go back and log in so that I can show you this. These are some of the settings that you can control down here. So based on what you're trying to do, and I have it set to automatically launch my application, so we're going to disable that. But these are the display settings. This is what you're allowing your users to do. You're enabling search. Allow users to choose whether to enable searching or not. So again, you're getting very granular here. From an applications display perspective, you want to be able to enable refresh. I kind of like enable refresh. It puts an icon there that allows the users to do a refresh, so that this comes in handy when someone calls the help desk and says, look, I don't have access to this application, and you add them to the right group. Instead of asking them to log out, log back in so they can see the application, you can tell them to click on the refresh button. Those are the two arrows that are going round and round, sort of, and it will just populate those applications again. You can enable return to the last folder visited. So if the user is logged into web interface and clicked through different folders and then logged out, when they log in the next time, web interface will place the users in the same folder structure. So if they were in Citrix Applications, Microsoft Office, when they log in, they're in that particular area, and then they can get out of it if you want to. If you don't have this enabled, then every time they log in, it'll default to the default view. And you can customize it here. Hints allow, self-explanatory whether you want to enable hints or not. Change view settings. Again, you're allowing, you're displaying icons, details, groups, so on and so forth. This, the default view is icons. You can change that if you wanted to list or details or tree. Groups. This will just change the display of what the applications will look like. Right now they look like icons, basically. You're also giving them access to which views are made available. Right now icons and lists are made available, and the default view is list, etc., etc. So just a lot of granularity here from a control perspective. From a tabs perspective, right now they're seeing applications, desktops, and printers or content. You can most certainly add more. You can change the arrangement of which one comes first. So if you wanted to put desktops ahead of applications or vice versa, you can do that here. You can also consolidate them so that there's only one tab for all of them, rather than breaking them down in terms of applications, desktops, and contents. They can all be resources, for example, or under applications, you're consolidating all of them. So we're going to go ahead and click on OK here, and let's go into appearance. And this is how you can customize the appearance of the website. So again, minimal will give you less graphics, and full here give you basically full graphics. If you choose full graphics, then you go to the header area. You're able to change the header logo. You're able to change the low graphics mode logo. You can add image hyperlink here by selecting this checkbox. So you can customize how it looks by branding it to a certain extent with your company logo or your particular information per se. If you go to the navigation bar, you're able to change colors. Again, you're able to change the background here, use an image URL, etc., etc. So again, you're playing with the customization of how the web interface looks. You won't be able to customize it as much as you want automatically. Through the GUI, you won't be able to customize it as much as you want. However, through a manual process, you can get web interface to look exactly like any corporate website in your environment, and I'll show you later on how you can do that. The content area, again, you're able to change the color of the text, etc., etc., put a different background, so on and so forth. If we click on content here, you're able to add different languages basically to support the different users that are connecting from different parts of the world. You can support French or Spanish or something like that, where you're giving users the ability to customize the text, etc., etc. So you have support for different languages per se in here. So we're going to go ahead and click on cancel to keep it. Again, the layout here, just an easy way of getting to it. And the screen that you're working on right now, we're working with the logon screen. You can feel free to switch it to the application screen and go through the customizations, so on and so forth. And then you have the messages screen as well, and shows you what's happening here. All right, we're going to click on cancel. Now there are certain aspects of the settings here that we're not going to cover. We're going to leave for a later lesson. So for example, secure access, we're going to talk about that a little later on when we talk about securing XenApp. But resource types, again, this we went through when we were creating the site, allows you to say what type of site are you creating. Is it online, offline, or dual? And if we right click on it again, we talked about client deployment. Let's take a look at client-side proxy. So this has to do with the user that's connecting to web interface and what the proxy settings at the endpoint are like. So if the user is on the LAN but they're behind the proxy for whatever reason, how are you going to configure the user's browser to give them access to web interface? By default, it's using the user's browser settings. You can always select that, change it, and some of the options that you have here. Again, use web proxy, auto detect, client defined, etc., etc. This just helps the user get access, hit that web interface so that they're able to connect and launch applications. All right, let's see what else we've got here. If we right click again, we're going to drag down to session preferences. This is going to deal with a lot of the session preferences. If we click on user customizations, you can select kiosk mode, enable kiosk mode by discarding user customization. So what happens here is that if the user customizes any of the web interface settings, so to speak, the next time they log in, if this is enabled, all of these settings will be reset to default and they would have to customize it all over again. Unless there's a particular reason you want the users to be happy users, so keep that disabled and allow them to see the settings the next time they log in. Again, unless there's a reason, you shouldn't change that. Display preferences button to users. This is the same button that you have up here. You can enable that particular button or disable it. If we go to web sessions, what's the timeout value for this web session? So after when we went back here a little bit ago, you saw that we had to log in. So how long before it times me out so that nobody can come in and launch applications if I step away from this particular browser? Persistent URLs. So if you select this checkbox here, enable users to access resources using browser bookmarks. So what this allows you to do is users can add particular applications or resources to their favorites. And what happens in that case is they don't even have to visit the web interface anymore. They can click on favorites and launch that directly. So this is an easier way of enhancing the user experience by not allowing them or not having them to log in again, but giving them access when they add things to their favorites to just log into that particular application or content. Connection performance, you can enable bandwidth control, you can allow users to customize color depth, etc., etc. This just basically enhances the user connection. In my opinion, this is a little too advanced for the users, but depending on the user community that you're part of, you might want to be able to give them access to control some of these or not. Display allows users to customize window sizes, allows font smoothing, etc., etc. Local resources, again here, you have a bunch of controls over what they can do from a local resources perspective. Allow or apply Windows key combinations, example Alt Tab in full screen, so that if the user is in a full screen Citrix published desktop, these are some of the combinations that they can use, etc., etc. Here you can do special folder redirection, you can configure that as well, and settings for PDA access. Now, user device name, if you select this checkbox, then you're overwriting the default user device name. That the user device name doesn't get passed through web interface. So this is where you can basically override or disable that. All right, if we right click on this again, let's go down here to workspace control. Workspace control is what we were talking about earlier in earlier lessons about session reliability and how users can go through a tunnel and it's going to freeze that session instead of disconnecting it and allow the user to automatically resume that session when they're outside of a tunnel, for example. That's workspace control. This is where you can configure all the settings and sessions for that particular setting from a web interface perspective over here. So if I right click on this again and we come down to site maintenance, of course you can always manage IIS hosting. You can repair the site if there's anything wrong here. You can uninstall it. You can run some diagnostics logging on it, and you can preview the site. So every time you're making a change, instead of opening up Internet Explorer and typing in the URL, you can always right click on it, click on preview, and it just takes you to that site immediately. So just some easier ways of navigating to that site directly. And that's all there is to web interface from a customization perspective. If you go to XenApp services sites here, you have a lot of the same options that you have under the XenApp websites. So we won't go through these again, but what I want to do at this point is switch back to our presentation and talk about how we can further custom brand our web interface server. Now, in addition to the customizations that we just saw during the demonstration part of this lesson, I know a lot of you are interested, and I'm one of them, of branding the web interface even further, branding it to look a lot more like our corporate websites, our corporate colors, our corporate environments, so that when users are visiting it, they don't necessarily feel that this is a foreign body, a foreign object, so to speak, but it is very tightly integrated within the different systems, our logos, our colors, etc., etc. What I showed you during the demo part, that was basic, it's modifying it through the GUI, etc. What I'm about to show you now is advanced customizations and configurations. This stuff typically, take it as far as you can go with what I've given you here. Maybe research a little bit on the internet for additional customizations that are very specific to what you're trying to do. But if you can afford it, or if your organization has designers on staff or developers, you should offload this task onto them. Now, that being said, we've been working with web interface version 5.3 up until now. And the reason for that is version 5.3 is the version that comes with the CD, and I just wanted to make sure that for the exam, for the CCA exam, we're covered from a functionality, from a look perspective, because the CCA exam tends to sometimes even ask about the different colors of web interface. However, when it comes time to the customization, I want to make sure I'm giving you the customization on the latest and greatest web interface, which is 5.4 as of this recording. Now, with version 5.4, the only difference between 5.4 and 5.3 is cosmetic. It's only visual. The look and feel of the web interface completely changed. All the backend is still completely the same. So I've upgraded to version 5.4, and I'll show you what it looks like in a second. And we're going to go through and customize the web page so that it looks a lot more like the NCOM corporate websites and colors and so on and so forth. So I want you to take a look at this slide, maybe pause it, print it, whatever you need to do with this particular slide if you want to follow through or follow along with some of the changes that I'm going to make. Now, I'm not going to read on screen what all these changes are. We're going to flip over to web interface. I'm going to show you what it looks like, and I'm going to show you exactly what we're going to change and where we're going to change it. But I wanted to give you something that you can refer back to if you want to make these modifications yourself. Alright, so first things first, let me show you what the new web interface site looks like so that as we're making these changes, you can follow along. So if I do localhost here, this is what it looks like. It is now horizontally divided. So you have the upper part, you have the lower part, and if we can ignore this for just a second here, by skipping this so that we can take a look, it would look something like this. Now, the first thing that will strike you is, well, I don't know if I want Citrix XenApp up here, so I want to get rid of this logo. I'm not necessarily convinced I want, this color background or this color background for the footer. And yeah, these computers might be cool here, but I don't really want them. And if I scroll a little down, I really want to get rid of this tagline, and I don't want these two logos down here whatsoever. I just want to be able to keep it clean, keep it sharp, leave the logon box in the middle, that's fine, but I kind of want to customize it a little bit. So there's a few things we can do. I'll show you where the files that are pointing to this image are. One thing you can do, very easy and very quick, which is to copy whichever image you want and just rename it to this file name, and it'll automatically pop up here. If you do that, then you don't have to go and open the layout.ascx file that I showed you and find the location and modify the value there. It's just easy, it's clean, bada bing, bada boom, it's done. I'll show you how it's done, and I'll show you also how you can modify it within layout.ascx. Well, now that you've seen where it is, let's start off by taking a look at where these pictures, these images, are located on web interface. So to do that, we're going to go to my computer, we're going to go to the C drive, and we're going to double click on inetpub here, and we're going to go into www root, we're going to go into Citrix, and XenApp, and down here you'll see that there's a media folder. Now with regards to those computers, the file name is called devices. So if I double click on devices, you'll see that there it is. Now, one easy way of getting rid of devices would be to just delete that file. So let's see what happens if I delete, or for that matter, let's go ahead and rename the file just in case. Let's do an underscore backup. Now there's several iterations of that file, so I'm going to try to refresh. If they don't go away, then we're going to modify this as well. And you'll notice that you have devices logged off as well. So when people, this is the logged in screen. When people log off, they'll still see the devices if you don't rename those as well. So if I do a refresh on here, well, they're still there. So let's go back in and also do the same thing and rename this file as well, underscore backup, and see what happens now. So we got rid of those devices. Now, if we wanted to get rid of Citrix XenApp logo up here, what I've done is I've copied the Encom logo down here to my desktop. Now, one easy way of figuring out what this file is, or what this file name is to right-click on it and drag down to where it says Save Picture As. Now, you'll notice that it is Citrix XenApp.png, and it'll show you the file extension down here as well. So one easy way of doing this is to just rename the Encom logo to Citrix XenApp. And then simply copying and pasting that on top of the existing Citrix XenApp logo. And we're going to do a replace here. Let's come back into the web page and hit refresh again. Now voila, the logo shows. Now obviously it doesn't look very good, but what we're going to do now is, well, this doesn't look very good, but maybe if I change the background of the upper portion of the screen to black, well, maybe that'll look a little better. So let's see if we can take care of that. To do that, we're going to go back here and we are going to go into the folder app data. And then inside of app data, we're going to find include, and we're going to locate a file called fullstyle.inc. Now you can open this with Notepad or WordPad, depending on the formatting and how it opens the file in. For me, it opened it up in Notepad, and the formatting is okay. If the formatting doesn't look good, I would suggest that you close it, open it back up in WordPad. Now, once you're inside of this file, what we want to do is search or find Horizon Top, and we're going to click on Find, and voila. Now, once you've located that section, what I want to do here is I want to change the value for the background color, and I also want to remove the image. So the first thing we're going to do here is go ahead and remove that image. So I'm going to just keep the quotes, and then the value for a black background, I believe, is 6 Fs. So let's do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's either 6 Fs or 6 zeros. We'll try and see what happens here. So let's go ahead and save. And what I'm going to do now is hit another refresh. Okay, voila. So that one was white. So what we'll do here is let's go ahead and change it to 6 zeros. I'm sure someone who's watching this live said, I could have told you that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now if we do a file save here, let's go ahead and refresh this again. There you go. Now it looks, a little better, right? And I kind of like the contrast between the black and the gray. But you know what? Maybe it'll look sharper if the lower part was gray as well. And I don't know about the tagline or these logos, but let's start with the lower part of the screen. Let's see if we can make that one also black. So in order to do that, what we want to do is also come back into this file and search for a different value. And this time we want to look for Horizon Page. Whoops. Let's just clean it up. So we want to look for the value Horizon Page. Let's go ahead and find that, and there it is. So what I'm going to do is also remove the image that is selected here. So we're just going to leave the quotes. And this time we're not going to make the same mistake. So we're going to do 6 zeros. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we're going to go ahead and save this. And let's see what happens when we do a refresh. Alright, so this kind of looks cool. It's starting to really look cool at this point. I like it. What we want to get rid of is this tagline over here, and we also want to get rid of the two Citrix logos down here. So let's see if we can very quickly take care of both of those. If you scroll a little down here, you'll see that you have the tagline down here, Horizon tagline. So if I go ahead and add another line, and let's see if we can add display none and see if that takes effect. Let me just move it here so just looks nice and even. Let's go ahead and click save here and refresh the page. Voila, so the tagline's gone, so the only thing left that I have to remove are those two logos down here. So let's see if we can locate them. Let's do a search for HDX, since I know one of them is the HDX logo. There you go. So we found the HDX logo, and I think if I just remove the inline here and set it to none and then save, I should be able to get rid of that particular logo. There you go. That one's done. Let's take care of the Citrix one as well. And if you locate the footer space IMG section here, and let's go ahead and add the line display none. Let's move it down here so it's nice. Let's go ahead and save that and see what happens when we refresh now. There you go. This is completely gone. It's now clean. And the last thing I want to show you before we wrap up this lesson is if you wanted to keep this particular image, but you wanted to maybe change its name or change the path that it's pointing to. Maybe you didn't want to rename the image and you wanted to do it a little cleaner, so to speak. Well, you would have to modify another file in here, and that other file would be called layout.ascx. If you open this particular file, let's say with WordPad this time, and if you search for the image, let's go ahead and maximize this. Now remember, when we modified the file, we changed it to Citrix XenApp.png. So if I locate this over here, now you can come down here and put whatever file name that you want in this particular file, and then make sure that file is available in the media folder, obviously. And then you don't need to change or rename anything. You just add your file and you're pointing to it from here. Bada bing, bada boom. Once you refresh the page, it will come up with your particular logo. So again, this is how you can customize how the web interface looks like. Now this is very, very quick and dirty that we did it here just so I can demo to you guys where you can make all these modifications. There are tons of modifications that you make, but for the most part, all the modifications you're going to make are in the fullstyles.inc file. So go ahead and go nuts with it, go crazy, enjoy it, and just make it look the way you need to, and go win those points with your manager. And that's all there is to it from a web interface customization perspective. Alright, so let's go ahead and recap what we've learned. So we started off by talking about how web interface communicates. What is the communication process? What is the flow of communication between an endpoint and web interface, and how web interface brokers that connection between the XML service and how it connects with Active Directory, how it talks to the Secure Ticket Authority service on the XenApp servers, and how it establishes a connection. So we went through and talked about that. We talked about the different web interface site types. We talked about the fact that there is a XenApp websites, and the fact that that is when you create a website, you allow the users to visit that website, enter a username and password, and get access to resources, as opposed to a XenApp services site, which is typically an interface for a XenApp plugin that gets installed on endpoint devices, so it interfaces with the web interface and enumerate applications and resources. In the demo portion, we talked about creating web interface sites. We created sites. We went through all the different configurations. We talked about the customization of your website through what you get with the web interface management console. And then I also pointed you guys to a virtualizationreview.com blog I wrote on how to further custom brand your web interface site so that it flows and integrates better with your corporate environment. I hope this lesson was informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.